Ever since I started my accounting and finance career, I have been using Excel almost on a daily basis. Excel is probably the most used software for accounting and FP&A professionals. If you are starting your career in FP&A or accounting and looking to upgrade your Excel skills quickly and effectively, you must watch this video till the end. In a moment, I will share Excel formulas, functions, and bonus tips that are most commonly and frequently used by FP&A and accounting professionals. Excel offers a large number of formulas and functions, but you do not need to learn all of them. In fact, with only a few formulas and tips, you can solve most of the day-to-day work-related problems. I'm also providing the Excel file that I will use in this video for you to download and follow along. Check the link in the description. The video is about an hour long, so I suggest you like it or add it to your playlist so that you can come back to it in case you cannot watch it completely in one sitting. And of course, if you have a good friend who is also interested, do share the video with them as well. Let's dive right in. Let's start with a bonus tip. If you're working on a file that was prepared by someone else, you just inherited the file and you want to understand what formulas and calculations were used in the file. There is a shortcut in Excel which shows you all the formulas on a given sheet. And the shortcut is that you press Ctrl and hold it. While holding it, press the grave accent key, which is just below the escape key on most keyboards. As soon as you press it, Excel will change the view and show you all the calculations and formulas. So for example, in column E, this formula was used, whereas in column C and D, these numbers were entered directly. So you can see all the calculations that the person before you or the person who prepared the file used. Press Ctrl and the grave accent key again, a great shortcut. There are more bonuses coming up, but let's start with our first tip now. Now, before we get a little deeper into Excel formulas and functions, there are some basic math calculations that we do in Excel that you are expected to know. If you are brand new to Excel and you have never used Excel before, just to get it out of the way, I want to show you that in Excel you do the basic addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division using these keys. I hope you know that already. Now, when it comes to the calculation of variances, there are two types of organizations. In some organizations, any increase is considered a positive variance. By positive, I mean the positive number, and any decrease is a negative variance. So if expenses increased, this will be shown in the variance column as a positive number. And also if sales increased, it will be shown in the variance column as a positive number. There are some other organizations which think of these numbers as favorable and unfavorable. So in those organizations, an increase in sales will be reflected with a positive number because it's a favorable variance. But an increase in expense would be reflected as a negative number because it's an unfavorable variance. So you need to know your organization, and the calculation may be different for each situation. You need to also know how to do the percentage calculation based on the variances. Let's assume that the organization we are dealing with considers variances favorable and unfavorable depending on whether they are positive or negative. So an increase is not necessarily a positive change, especially if it's in expenses. So in that case, your variance versus budget would be, for expenses, it would be budgeted expense minus actual expense. And as you can see, the actual expense is higher than budget, so it's a negative variance. Copy this all the way down, but stop at gross sales. We were looking at department expenses, but here we have gross sales. In the case of gross sales, the formula will be different. This will be current year minus budget. So you can see that the gross sales for the current year are below budget by 10,000, and that's why it's shown as a negative variance. We do the same with prior year. Now when it comes to calculating the percentage, so first the percentage versus budget. So you will take the variance amount, which is variance versus budget, and divide it by, do you know what you will divide it by? Will it be the current year number or the budgeted number? If you said budgeted number, that's right. Budget is your reference point when it comes to percentage variance. Similarly, for prior year, you will take the variance for prior year and divide by, again, not current year, this time it will be the prior year. Okay, you can just copy the formula all the way down and Excel will automatically calculate the variance percentage. Next, we look at how to apply growth percentages. So for example, for a company, year one revenue was 650,000, and here are the expected revenue growth percentages for the next 4 years. What will be the amount of revenue at the end of each year? So that will be, you take the number from our current year times and open the brackets 1 plus the rate, close it, and that's your number. So in year 2, that's 695,500. Then you will just copy and paste the formula all the way down. You could also drag it. Important to note here is that in year 3, the 5% growth is based on year 2 revenue. That's why in our formula, as we copy the formula down, it also moves the reference point, the base reference, which becomes the next year. Moving on, an important difference is between average and weighted average. So you have 3 products, A, B, and C. These are the number of units you sold in a year, and these are the prices per unit for each product. Now, if somebody asked you, can you give me the average price? A simple average would just use the average formula. And the average of these 3 prices is $56.67. But that would not be accurate. The average price should be a weighted average price. So you can calculate in 2 ways. One is the longer way, which is you just simply take each unit, multiply it by the price, and do this for all products. Then you sum the 3 products. You say your total revenue is $170,000. So 170,000 divided by the total number of units, which is 3,500, is $48.57. This is your weighted average. There is a quicker way of doing that too. If you don't want to go through this exercise, is you use the sum product formula. So the sum product will simply multiply your first array, which is the unit sold, with the second array, which is the price per unit. And as you can see at this point, it gives us 170,000. Then you can also divide by the total number of units. So this is truly your weighted average price, and it is important which one you are looking at depending on the situation you are dealing with at work. Let's keep going. So the next one is the use of count and COUNTA functions. In your work as an accountant or an FP&A professional, you will be required to count numbers, text like employee names, employee IDs, and other data quite frequently. So when you have only numbers and you want to count the total number of entries, you can simply use count function. So count and give the range, and you see it calculates that there are 10 IDs. But when you don't have numbers, then you can use a slight variation, which is count A, and it will give you the count. Here you can also see that where there are blanks, it ignored. So we use the COUNTA function here, and it ignored the blanks. So you can see that only 8 out of the 10 people are invited. Now let's look at rounding. So you have round, a simple round, round up, and round down. So you have this number with a certain number of decimal places. You can simply round this number, and this is required quite often in Excel. And you select the number in the brackets and then the number of digits. So for example, if you want to round this down to 2 digits or 2 decimal places, you will enter 2. Press enter, and you see Excel rounded it to 2 decimal places. You could also make it a totally whole number by rounding it to 0 decimal places, and you see this is a whole number. Sometimes you intentionally want to round up or round down. So the formula is very similar. Just round up the number and the number of digits. Let's say in this case you also want it to be no decimal places. So as you do that, you see it rounded it up to 388, although our normal rounding would have been 387, but because we use the round up formula, it rounded it up. Similarly, in the case of round down, again, if you wanted to round to 0 decimal places, you see that it rounded it down. Next up is dealing with text. You have to deal with text in Excel a lot, and I will show you a few tips on working around and maneuvering with text. Now, in dealing with data, let's first talk about data validation. So you have asked somebody to fill a form with employee names in their respective departments. You don't want them to enter manual information because you only have 5 selected department names and you want the names to be exactly the way they are. How can you enforce that only one of these 5 names can be used? So click on the cell where you want the input to be done, click on data, and then click on data validation. Here in valuation criteria, you select list and then give the source of the list, which will be these 5 names, this range. Click on OK. And now when somebody tries to enter information, they can see that they only have these 5 options. They can either select, so for example, marketing, or they can also start typing. For example, if they start typing finance, this option appears here, right? And then they can use this to enter this information. If they try to enter something different, for example, advertising, and they press enter, you see an error message shows up. So this way you can ensure only the data that you need is entered here. You will be dealing with files that are downloaded from other systems and are in a format which you cannot really use in Excel. And here is a prime example. This data is in comma separated format. So you can see, for example, in the first cell, you have full name, email, department, location, and phone. They're all separated by commas. They are not in separate columns. And then the data follows. So the name, email, department is also entered, but in comma separator format. What you can do is use text to column function in Excel. Select the first column where all the data is, and then click on data, text to columns. And here you have 2 options, delimited and fixed width. Fixed width is where you manually select where you want the data to be separated, but we will go with delimited. That's a good option here. Click on next. And by default, you see a comma is already selected. But if, for example, your data was not separated by commas, but instead semicolon or space, you could even use that. You see, when I used space, even the names are split up because there's a space between first name and second name. But we don't want that. We only want a comma separation. So you select comma, click next. It shows you a preview of how it will look. And then you click on finish. And now if you look at these columns, I'm going to just select all the columns and double click. This will automatically adjust the width of the column. And you can see now all the text is nicely split into the respective columns with the titles there as well. Next problem you often face is duplicates. There may be duplicates in the data that you want to remove. So first of all, how do you find duplicates? I'm going to select all of the columns A to E, go to Home, and then Conditional Formatting, highlight cells, and here you have duplicate values. So as soon as I click it, Excel shows me these duplicates. So if I click on OK, this will keep these cells highlighted for me to see. Let's do Ctrl+Z, undo, to go back to the original position. So now I want to remove these duplicates. So highlight the same columns again. And now I go to Data. And here you see an icon that says remove duplicate. So I click on this and it asks me which columns I want the duplicates to be removed from. I also want to let it know that my data has a header, so it knows that the first row is actually the header row. And then when I click OK, so yes, you have duplicates removed. As we just work with data, let's also look at some text and date functions that are frequently used. First of all, you can ask Excel to tell you exactly what date is today by entering a formula called today, and what time is now by entering a formula called now, and just use the brackets. Now you see it showed me the date instead of the time. That's because the formatting of this cell was set to be date format. So anytime you need to change the format of a cell, you can go to the Home menu, and then here you can open the drop down menu and change it to time, for example. And you can see that this tells me exactly the time that is right now. Excel also has day, month, and year functions, which can help you determine exactly the day, the month, and the year in a date. So for example, here this will be the day, which is the 2nd. We can see that. And you must have noticed that as soon as I pressed enter, the time got updated as well. So it's a function that is live. Every time you do a new calculation, this time will keep updating. Similarly for month, shows me this is the month of November, and year is the simple year function. Okay, now often you will be required to deal with dates and convert them into another format, right? So for example, here you have different specific dates in the year 2024 and 25, but a common conversion that you might need to do is just change it to the month and year. So here you can use the text function. A text function is very useful and it has multiple options that you can work with. The format is, again, you start with the text and you enter the text that you want to work with and add a comma, and then you add the format. So in this case, we said that we wanted the format to just reflect the month and year. So you will start with quotation marks and then you will put 3 times M, so this reflects the month, and a space, and 4 times enter Y, and then close the quotation marks, close the bracket, press enter, and you see this shows you Jan 2024. And again, if you just drag it down, it shows all the dates in their respective months. Now, if you want to learn what are the different text formats available, here's what you do. You press the control key and press the number 1. This will open up this format cells window. Now you click on number and you go to custom, and you see all of these different options that you can convert the text to. Now you can also use this text format to do some other conversions. So for example, next one, the way you are working with the files that you are working with require you to reflect month and year in another format. So in this case, let's say we start with month, but we only want a 2-digit month here. And then you also want the 2 numbers for the year. Okay, so you do space YY, and then you close it. You see this is now a different format. So it's like 01 for January and 24 for the year 24, and you can drag it all the way down. Sometimes when you're working with files from different regions, for example, Europe versus US versus Canada, they may have different date formats. You can also switch the format using this function. So text. Now you can see here we have the day first, then the month, and then the year. But let's say you want the month first, then the day, and then the year. So you will again select the text you want to adjust and then start with the quotation marks. Now first you want the month. So you put space DD for day and then YY for year and close the bracket. And you see now it starts with Jan 14, 2024. And you drag it all the way down. While you're working with text, you can also select certain parts of the text. So for example, in this case, if in this cell, if you just wanted to enter some alphabets from the left side, let's say the first word here, you will use the left formula, open the brackets, select the text, comma, and the number of characters you need. So in this case, bonus has 5. And by the way, there is a hidden message there. And you have bonus. Right is quite similar, but mid is slightly different. So let's start with right first. So here we want the last 4 digits, select the cell, and you get soon. For the mid formula, you start with mid, open the brackets, you select the text. First, you have to tell the character where you want to start from. So in this case, bonus has 5, then we have a space, which is 6. So the character we want to start from is 7 for C. And then how many characters do we need? So we have 6 in the word coming. So we enter 6 and we close the bracket, and you have bonus coming soon. If you don't know already, you can actually calculate the number of days between 2 dates in Excel simply by just subtracting the days. So in this case, we take the last day or end date minus the start date, press enter, and you get total 560 days between these 2 dates. Now these days may include weekends and holidays. There's a formula in Excel which calculates the number of work days, which is equal to net work days. Open the brackets. In this case, you will start with the start date first, then comma, and end date. and as you close, it shows you that between these two dates there are 400 business days, which is Monday to Friday by default. But in Excel, there are options for variations, and you can also add holidays so that Excel will exclude those holidays and only give you the number of work days without the holidays and weekends. Okay, a simple example would be, although there probably are more holidays in a year, but let's say between these two dates there was only one holiday, and that was, let's say, on the 25th of December 2025. So you enter this date. Now if you go back to the formula, and after you have entered the end date, you add the holiday. You just select the holiday and press enter. You see it shows 399 work days. So it considers this holiday as a non-work day and reduces the number. So if there are more holidays, which probably there are in a year, you have to list all of those holidays, and you can select the range in this calculation here, and Excel will exclude those holidays. Now, sometimes you are at a given date, let's say again 15th of Feb 2025, and you want to see what would be the date after a certain number of months. So let's say you're starting a project on the 15th of Feb 25, and you want to know exactly what will be the date 15 months from this date. So you can use this formula called eDate. And again, you will start with the starting date and the number of months. You just enter 15 months. Close the bracket, and it gives you the date, which will be 15th of May 2026, exactly 15 months after this date. Okay, it's time for our next Excel bonus. This bonus is extremely useful. I have used it so many times, and it has saved me so much time and frustration. Okay, what is the bonus? What is the shortcut? If you want to directly jump to a source of calculation where a formula is used, where a link is used, you can press Control and left square bracket. And as soon as you press the Control and left square bracket, Excel will jump to the source. Okay, let me show you an example. So here we have 2021 actual sales, which are referenced to cell C10, which is coming from the same file. So I am pressing now Control and left square bracket, and watch how it jumped to this cell. You can see the cell here. I've selected C4 and I press Control and left square bracket, and see how it changed to C10, which is this cell. That was the same sheet. You can do this with another sheet also. So you have 22 sales not in the same sheet, but in the sheet called bonus 2B. So again, I press Control and left square bracket, and Excel jumps to C4 in sheet bonus 2B. Let's go back. You can actually open a different file as well by pressing this button. Yeah, the file is closed right now, and the link for 2023 forecast is in another file. And as soon as I press Control plus left square bracket, Excel opens the file and jumps to that reference. Saved me a lot of time, especially when you are working with large files and one file has multiple links. By the way, if you ever want to see how many links or where the links are, you can click on data and then workbook links here. Currently it's grayed out because this file has no links. But anyway, if your file has multiple links and you want to directly jump to exactly the cell and the file which has that information, you can use this shortcut. Extremely useful bonus tip. There are more bonuses coming up, so stay with me. Don't miss out on those bonuses. Okay. Now let's work with lookup, a very common function that is required in our jobs almost on a regular basis. You may have heard of the function like VLOOKUP, but there's also a function called XLOOKUP. I recently did a poll on my channel, and I asked you the question, what formula do you use for looking up? Is it VLOOKUP, is it XLOOKUP, or is it some other formula? So for example, index and match can also be used for lookup. Here is the response I got. 80% of you still use VLOOKUP, only 14% XLOOKUP, and then 5% use another formula. Now XLOOKUP is relatively recent formula. It's been a few years now that it's been in place, but I can totally understand why people are not shifting from VLOOKUP to XLOOKUP, because it is a change. It means you need to train your brain to learn a different format of formula, and all of us, including me, avoid that. But once I learned about the power of this XLOOKUP formula, I switched and I never had to look back. XLOOKUP takes care of a lot of the challenges you face with VLOOKUP. So if you're brand new, if you have not learned VLOOKUP or XLOOKUP, I would suggest that you start with XLOOKUP because you probably won't be needing VLOOKUP. Okay. So I'm going to start with XLOOKUP and maybe I'll talk about VLOOKUP a little bit so that if you are using an older version of Excel where XLOOKUP is not available, at least you know how to look up information. But I do want to highlight that I have detailed videos both on XLOOKUP and VLOOKUP, which tell you in much more detail how you can powerfully use these formulas. So don't miss out on those. All of the videos I'm going to talk about today and the playlist, I will include links in the description. So make sure you go through them. Okay. Now coming back to a simple lookup, first we'll deal with the simple lookup, then we will follow up with a little more complicated or complex lookup. Okay, so here you have department and budget expense, and you just want to bring in the actual spend, actual expense for each department. Here's your information. You can see that the format or sorting is different. It starts with IT, so you cannot just simply link the cell directly. It varies, it will be wrong. So let's start with a simple XLOOKUP function equal to XLOOKUP. All for Excel formulas open, start with the formula name and open with a bracket. So what are we looking for? We're looking for this department, marketing department. And the columns we are going to use are, this is the department where we will find. Now notice that whenever I use lookup, I usually directly select the entire column. This helps me save time, and also it helps me in the case new information is added below the cells, I don't have to change the range. There is a way that instead of selecting the column, you can select the range. I rarely do that because I find this way to be more efficient. So you select the column and put a comma, and then you select the column where you will find the result from. Okay, so F to F and G to G. So select column F and G, close the bracket. And there you see it brings the result from marketing. Here marketing is 52,000. Now when you are selecting these columns, make sure that you do not add any other information below this table which may confuse the lookup or which may bring the wrong results, right? So if you are going to follow what I do, which is select the columns, which I recommend, make sure that your files are set up in a way that there's no additional information other than exactly the information that is supposed to be here with this table, right? So here only departments, new departments if there are any, actual spend only, nothing else. Okay, so this is a simple lookup. Let's look at a little more complicated lookup now. Now why is this one a little more complicated is here we have the customer, product and region. So we have three criteria instead of just one, which was the department in our previous example. And if you look at our source data, there are multiple customers, multiple products, regions, and their respective budgeted sales and actual sales. But we are only interested in stock industries. Okay, so here what we will do is we will help our lookup formula with something called concatenate. Okay, so this is a name of a formula as well. So here in our final destination, we will create concatenate formula. And this will be all the text that you need separated by comma. So just add commas and select all the text. And what Excel does is just put all of the pieces together in one cell. Okay, and then you copy it all the way down. So here you have full concatenation for all of these different sections. You have to do something similar in your source data as well. So let's call it concatenate as well, and you do the same here. So now you have something that the formula can look up to. By the way, you saw me moving quickly through the entire data. If you want to go to the end of data in a table, press Control and down arrow, and it jumps directly to the last cell. Control plus up. Control plus up key brings you back, and then Control plus right takes you to the column most right of this table, and then Control plus left brings it back. Now in the lookup formula, instead of looking up the name of the customer or product or region, we will just look up the concatenate column. And when we are going to the source data, also the first column selection will be the concatenate selection. Now because we need budgeted sales, the second selection will be budgeted sales. Again, everything is separated by comma in Excel formulas. Close the brackets, press enter, and you see this brings 58,166. Let's go back and check. Go down to stock industries, and you see for Alpha North America stock industries, the amount is 58,166. If we had not done this, we didn't use the concatenate formula. Let's do this for Europe region. If we had just selected stock industries, and here as well we just selected the customer and budgeted sales, close the bracket, you see it brings up the first cell that it can find that matches your criteria. So in our source data, if you go to stock industries, the first cell is 58,116. So Excel would not know that this is the additional criteria you are working with. So this concatenate is a pretty helpful function that helps you. So this is wrong. We just drag this formula all the way down, and you can do the same for actual sales. In the case of actual sales, of course, although you will look up to this concatenate column, but your values will come from column F. And there you go. Now, another quick bonus, when looking up data, a lot of times you will not find information. So I'm adding a department here in our original example, which does not exist here. Excel automatically calculated this using the same XLOOKUP formula for me, but because it didn't find the advertising department here, it gave me an NA error. Okay, sometimes you don't want that. For example, in your case, you may be looking for any departments which are not present in this section. We just want 0. Okay, we know that if the department is not there, it means the expense or spend there was 0. So you can use a formula which is called IFERROR. So I'm going to go into the same cell where we have this formula, click on it, and then enter IFERROR. Open the bracket, keep my existing formula, and just at the end of the formula, I put a comma and I add 0. Okay, so if there is an error, just return 0 as value. Close the bracket, press enter, and you can see now this shows 0. If I copy this formula up to the other departments, it doesn't impact them because they are still valid. It only shows 0 where it doesn't find anything. So let's say if I just suddenly deleted HR, you see HR becomes 0 as well. Control Z to undo. But this is a good bonus tip as well. I use this IFERROR function a lot because I don't want NA or some other functions. You can also tell Excel to return a blank value. In that case, instead of using 0, you will use the 2 quotation marks and then just press enter, and you see now the cell is blank. When you're doing complex calculation, this makes a big difference. So it's important that you know this formula. Now I did say that I will show you how to use VLOOKUP instead of XLOOKUP. So going back to our simple example, now we want to look up the same information. We'll use VLOOKUP formula, select the department that we're looking for, go to the source data. Instead of selecting columns separately, we will select the entire table range. So in this case, it's just 2 columns, and then press comma again. And now we have to tell Excel what column number will we pull the information from. That's one of the reasons also I don't like this formula anymore. In this case, the column is number 2. You enter column number 2. There's one more important step. You add comma, and you have to tell whether it's going to be an exact match or an approximate match. You will use an exact match so that it brings in the correct information. Otherwise, it looks for an approximate lookup, which is not ideal in these cases. Now, when you deal with lookups, something that is really quite similar but serves a different function is sumif or sumifs, which basically sums the information if it matches a certain criteria. Now, if you wanted the sum of all the sales for North America, so in this case, you are not too concerned about the customer or the product. You just want total sales for North America, Europe, and Asia. How do you do that? Here, lookup will not help because lookup only brings in a single piece of information. But now you want a sum, all of the region sale, right? So here you will use a formula. Let's first do a single criteria formula, which is sumif. Again, you have an option called sumifs, which we will deal with shortly. I prefer using sumifs only because It helps both when you have single criteria and multiple criteria. But anyway, let's go with the formula. So sumif, you open the bracket. First, you will go back to your source data and look for the region column. This is the region column, so we select column D, add a comma, then we are going to look for the region that we are currently concerned with, add a comma again, and then we select the column where the sales actually are. So this will be budgeted sales here. Close the bracket. Now we can check this in our source data. So click anywhere on the table, click on data and select filter. And now you can select the region, North America. And you can either select all of the numbers together and it will show you the sum here, 1526, you see this down here. Or you could also do a formula called subtotal. Use 9 for sum and then select this range and it gives you the same number which we have here with the sumif formula. So drag it all the way down and then you can get the same calculation for actual sales as well. Just change the sum column. So that was sumif, but what if we have multiple criteria? We want the region as well as product sale. Okay, so we've selected that for North America, we want alpha, for Europe, beta, and for Asia, we want gamma only. Okay, so you have multiple criteria here. You can use the formula called sumifs or sumifs with an S in the end, and format is slightly different for this formula. You start with the bracket and you directly start with the sum range first. So in this case, we want budgeted sales. I'm going to just select the budgeted sales column first. Secondly, we want the criteria number 1, which in this case is product. So I will select the product range, add the comma, go back to your final destination, and here we select the criteria 1. So we selected the range for criteria 1 and then we select the criteria 1, add another comma, go back to your source data, select the second range, the criteria 2 range, and then comma and add back here the second criteria. Close the bracket and enter, and it works. And why it works in the previous case as well is because in that case, if we had only one criteria, we could just select one criteria. Here we have 2, so we have given 2 ranges and 2 criterias. Anyway, this calculation works and it's very powerful function in Excel. Let's now look at Excel's conditional formatting, which is also quite powerful and useful, especially in financial analysis and reporting. So you see here variances versus budget. These are actual sales. Wherever the actual sales are below budget, the amounts are negative, and where they are above budget, they are positive. Now, if you want to show these numbers in a certain colors, for example, if you want to show the negative amounts in red color, that is what is commonly used. You select all of the variances and go to Home and then Conditional Formatting and click on Highlight Cells. Because all the negative numbers are below 0, you can click on less than 0 and then select the type of color coding you want to choose for such variances. If you click OK, you see all of the negative variances are shown in red. Now if you want to show all the positive variances in green, you can again select all of the variances, and instead of less than, now you choose greater than 0, and here you can change it to green fill with green text. Click OK, and there you see the favorable variances. A quick view. Now if you don't like it, you want to clear this formatting, you can go to Conditional Formatting, Clear Rules, Clear from entire sheet, and they are gone. You can also choose Excel's predefined options such as the data bars, which for example here shows the extent of the positive and negative variance represented by a data bar. You can also select color scales, and you can also select these icons. So for example, if we select this one, you can see it shows nicely where the problems are and where we are doing well above budget. This helps with quick formatting and identification of variances. Now, if you want to understand what is the criteria for each of these data icons or bars, you can click on Conditional Formatting and go to your respective icon set, for example. So in this case, these are the icons. You click on More Rules here. And this shows you how the settings are defined, and you can go in and even change those settings. If you want to see what conditional formatting rules are already applied, click on Manage Rules and it will show you the rules that are applied. Then again, you can either edit them or delete those or create your own new rules. Now let's talk about pivot tables for a moment. If you haven't started using pivot tables yet, I highly encourage you start doing that. Hopefully I will show you a few tips here with pivot tables that will inspire you to start using them. They are extremely essential for reporting and analysis. They are the backbone of reporting and analysis. Once you start using pivot tables, it's hard to go back. Okay, you don't know what you are missing right now if you haven't already started using pivot tables. So let's quickly go through this. We have this information, customer, product, region, and we have sales information and also cost of sales. How do you create a pivot table? Click on any cell and then press Ctrl and A key. That will select the entire data table. It's important that you make sure that the entire data is selected. There are no spaces or gaps that are not selected. What's also important is that all of the columns have a title. If there is any column without a title, let's say blank, the pivot table will not work. So make sure that is in order. So again, I press Ctrl A, click on Insert, Pivot Tables, and you have an option to create the pivot table in the same sheet or a new worksheet. Let's create a new worksheet. And you're ready to start creating your pivot table. So why this is amazing for analysis is you can select and choose the information that you want to see and then play with it. Okay, so let's start with customer names. Okay, we want customer names. So immediately it gives you all the customer names that are available in the data. So when you look at it like this, you have to go through multiple rows. Here you have all the customers in the pivot table listed out. And then let's say we want to jump directly to our actual sales for the current year. So you click and drag it to the values section, this field, actual sales value, and there you go. You have all the values here. Now, first thing I want to do is I want to see what are our largest customers. So click on any customer name and then right click, click on sort and more sort options. And I want descending order of sales value. So you click OK, and immediately it sorts customers by highest value to lowest value. Okay, I like this information, but I want to know more. So I want actual units sold. Again, I'll click and drag it to the values section. And you can see the sorting still applies. And now I have all the units sold. And let's also bring in the actual cost of sales. Okay, so we are going to do a margin analysis now. Before we do that, we can change the format of the information that is shown here. So units, for example, we want to show in number format. You can right click, go to value field settings, and then click on number format. And this one, we just want a number and we want it separated by commas. And since it's units, we don't want any decimal places. Click OK and OK. And you see this field is now nicely formatted. For values, we do the same. This time we choose currency. We want the 2 decimal places in this case. And we click OK. Okay, now that we're happy with the formatting, we want to see the gross profit and gross profit margin, but this information was not available in our original source data. You can actually work directly with the pivot table and start creating those calculations. So for example, let's start with gross profit, which will be sales minus cost of sales. Click on one of the customers and pivot table analyze and select this field items and sets. Click on calculated field. Now you can give this field a name. So let's call it gross profit. And the calculation would be actual sales value minus actual cost of sales. And maybe we should also call it gross profit actual because we also have budget in the source data. We want to identify this as actual gross profit. Okay. So click on OK and Excel immediately calculates the gross profit for you. and also shows you in the pivot table. We also want to see the gross profit margin or gross profit percentage. Same way, go to calculated field. Let's call it gross profit percentage. And this time the calculation will be gross profit actual, the new field that we just created, divided by the actual sales value. Click OK. And you have the margins here again. Again, you have to change the format. This time I'm going to use a shortcut, not highly recommended, but I'm just going to select this data directly. Click on home and then click on percentage, and it changes. Okay. So see how quickly it gives us this information. Now you can change your sorting as well. So for example, you want to sort the customers with the lowest gross profit margin to highest. Go back to the customer, any customer cell, right click, sort, more sort options. Now instead of selecting actual sales value, you click on gross profit percentage. If you do it this way, this will select the highest gross profit first, but we want to do the lowest first. So we'll go with the ascending order and then select sum of gross profit percentage, click OK. And there you see the lowest customer at the top. And you can see nicely how Excel is showing us the gross margin sorted as well as the total gross profit percentage on the total sales value. This is only the beginning, right? So I just hit the pivot table field list. So if you go to pivot table analyze, here's the field list button, you can turn it on and you can see the field list again. So let's say I want the region to be a filter. So I select the region field and bring it here to the filter, and it shows up at the top. And I just only want to look at, let's say, North America. And you can see the pivot table quickly got updated and we are now only seeing information for North America. All of our setup is still there. Everything that we created, the fields and the format and the sorting, all of it is still valid. Additionally, you like the customer information, but you want to see product as well for North America. Again, go back to field list and you bring in product information right next to customer. And you now see this by customer and product. All of this information is now visible by customer and product. Now you say, okay, so right now our gross profit margin is sorted by the lowest margin customer, but you also want it to be sorted by the lowest margin product first. So this time you click on one of the products, right click, sort, more sort options, ascending, same gross profit percentage, click OK. And now you see within the customer as well, the gross profit margin is sorted based on the lowest gross profit percent to the highest gross profit percent. So there's so much you can do with pivot tables. This is just an introduction. Hopefully it inspires you. I have multiple videos on pivot tables. There is a playlist. Link is available in description. Make sure you go through. There's so much you can do with pivot tables. Here's a quick little bonus tip for pivot tables as well. Once you are happy with the pivot table, let's say this one is only showing units and sales for by product for North America, you can actually copy the pivot table and paste it, and it creates a quick copy of your pivot table. And here you can change now, let's say the region to Australia. And both of these pivot tables are now using the same source data, but you can create multiple copies and start looking at different views at the same time. I spoke to somebody who's been working in Excel for over 10 years, and he mentioned to me that he did not know you could actually copy the pivot table. So something that I expected everyone to know, but there you go, another quick bonus tip for you. Let's go through another powerful Excel function, which is the if and nested if statements. So here we have 5 students which have achieved certain scores, and we want to add a formula here which shows whether they have passed or failed, and the passing score is 50. How will you do that? You create an if statement, so equal to if. Now we want this cell C5 is greater than or equal to 50, then it's a pass. So you always have to add text in quotation marks. Else, if the value is false, just put fail. And if I copy this formula, you can see that 2 of our students unfortunately have failed. Now we also have grading, and this is where we can use the nested if statement. By the way, this can also be done by using XLOOKUP, and I have a video on that, how you can do it. That's actually a much faster way of doing that instead of creating a nested if statement. But anyway, here you can learn the functionality, how this works. So the grading scale is that 90 or above is A, 80 to 89 B, 70 to 79 C, and all the way till F, which is any score below 50. Okay, so how will you create the nested if statements? We start with if again. This cell is, so we know that anything above 90 or above is A. So we say if it's greater than or equal to 90, A. Now where we say value false, instead of just adding a single false value, because we have multiple grades here, multiple scales, we want to add another if statement. That's why it's called a nested if statement. So again, if the logical value, if cell C14 is greater than or equal to 80 this time, the grade is B. Now, the way Excel works with if statements is that it will look at the first argument, which is whether C14 is greater than or equal to 90 or not. And if the answer is true, it will give us this result. And if it's not true, it will move to the next one. That's why it's important to sequence it correctly. So we start with the highest and then we are slowly going down to the lowest grade. So again, after B, we have to do another nested if, which is if this is greater than or equal to 70 this time, and the grade will be C. So I'll quickly complete the formula all the way till score of F. I will show you there. So now in my formula, you can see that I have taken care of all of the grades up until the point E, and the final grade is F. So the last value will not be a nested if statement. It will just be F, because if it's not greater than or equal to 50, then it's grade F. Okay. So as soon as I do that, I still have to make sure that I have closed all the brackets. So if you look at this, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 5 brackets. So we already have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you press enter and it shows the grade. If you copy it all the way down, so you can see that it's automatically calculating the grade for each student. Let's change gears a little bit and get to the more truly financial calculations that we often have to perform in our work as analysts and accountants. So the first one is net present value. Excel has made it really fairly simple how to calculate the net present value. So the formula is actually called NPV. We always need a discount rate to discount the present value of future cash flows. So link it to the discount rate and then select all the future cash flows except the initial one. We are assuming that the timing of cash flow is at regular intervals. So at the end of year 1, at the end of year 2, and so forth. This will give us the present value of all the cash flows from year 1 to year 5, which is 152,000. So if you can see, if you do a simple sum, the sum is 200,000, but because of the discount rate of 9%, the net present value is 152,000. But for the calculation of full NPV, we have to also add the initial cash outflow, which is 100,000 negative. So net present value of all the cash flows for this investment is 52,000. It's a positive number. It means it is an investment that is worth making. If the number was negative, then the decision would be to not go ahead purely on financial grounds. Whenever we work with NPV, another common criteria is internal rate of return, which is the IRR. Again, very simple formula. Just IRR and select all of the cash flows and close the bracket. So the IRR, or internal rate of return, is 26%, which means that based on these cash flows, this project gives us a return of 26%, which of course is higher than 9%. That is why our NPV was also positive. Internal rate of return really shows us the rate of return at which the cash flows become zero or break even. So in this case, 26% shows a positive rate of return versus our discount rate. So this calculation is based on outflow at regular intervals, but in reality we know that the cash inflows and outflows may not be as regular. So there is calculation available in Excel for that as well. The formulas are called XNPV and XIRR. So here you can see the cash flows are similar, but we have actual dates when the cash flows will take place. So for XNPV, it's even simpler than MPV. You just type the formula, add the rate, which again we'll say is 9%, and then select the range of all of the cash flows. Also select all of the dates. Close the bracket and enter. And you see here the net present value, considering the timing of cash flow, is slightly lower. It's about $45,000. And the same for XIRR. So again, you enter the formula called XIRR. And again, you will select all the cash flows and the dates for each of those cash flows. Close the brackets, and you can see even the XIRR percentage here is lower because you can see that some of the cash flows are in March, June, October, December. They're not happening at the same regular intervals. So Excel makes it very easy for us to do these calculations. There are formulas available that you should know. At this point, it appears that Excel does not have a formula for payback period, which is another common calculation that is done when we are considering feasibility of investments. But of course, there are manual ways of doing the calculation. If you are interested, let me know in the comments how to calculate payback period of an investment. You may also be required to forecast, for example, forecast sales, expenses, profits. Excel does have a couple of useful forecast formulas that you can utilize. In our example, we have monthly sales for the years 2022, 23, and 24. So yeah, for each month in those years, we have actual sales information. And now we are trying to build a forecast for the years 25, 26, and 27. So the next 3 years. We have previous 3 years information. This graph shows what the sales are. And as you can see, it looks like this is seasonal sales. There are spikes and then drop in sales in certain months. So if you wanted to forecast this, there are two options. The two of the formulas that we will discuss today are linear forecast and then forecast with exponential smoothing. Okay, let's start with linear forecast, and I have linked the results in this calculation to this graph. So we will see how the linear forecast works versus the forecast with exponential smoothing. Okay, so start with linear forecast. The formula is forecast period linear, and I believe we can only use the forecast function as well. And then we need the date for, or the period for which we need the forecast, which will be this cell, so 31st January 25. And then known values, known Y's, which will be the sales dollars, comma, and known dates. Now make sure you freeze the cell reference, press F4, and it adds a $ next to the letter, so it freezes or locks the cell reference. And let's copy it all the way down. And you can see this is a linear forecast, so this orange line represents these forecast numbers. So you can clearly see it does not account for the seasonality here. It just looks like it's seeing a slightly downward trend in the actual results, and it's showing that forecast to reflect in the next upcoming 3 years. Now we do the forecasting with exponential triple smoothing. So the formula is quite similar. The only difference is now you will have forecast period ETS, and again target date, and select the values. This time I'm going to press F4 right now, and I also select the dates and press F4, close the brackets. That's the first sales, that's the forecast. Now again copy this formula all the way down, and you see this one now, the second forecast, and let's just delete the linear one for now. So you see the second forecast does take into account the seasonality. This is all Excel looking at our last 3 years data and figuring out a forecast based on the seasonality. Frankly, in practice, This calculation helps, but there is a little bit more thought and effort you have to put into forecasting for future. You probably need to understand the market, all the key drivers that impact the forecast, speak to business, and then come up with a forecast which may be a mix of using Excel formulas and a bit of manual input. Now, do me a favor, if you found any of the information I shared with you in this video helpful, please let me know in the comment exactly which part of the video, which formula, which tip, maybe it was the bonus, helped you and is something that you learned and you can apply at your workplace. It will mean a lot to me if you leave a comment personally, individually, and let me know what you thought about the video or any portion of the video that really helped you. Now, before I let you go, let me give you one final bonus that also helps quite a bit. Let's say you're creating this template for sales, cost of sales and profit, and you already have this file with columns for the year 2024. You want to roll this over to 2025. Instead of manually going in and making all the changes like this, you can use the find and replace function. So select all the cells where you want to make the change. Press Ctrl and H, which is the find and replace shortcut. So for all numbers where you have 2024, you just want 2025. So in the replace with section, enter 2025 and click on replace all, and all 12 months are now showing 2025. Hope this helps. Like and subscribe, and make sure you watch the multiple playlists I have included in the description. Thank you. Goodbye.